It's about winter in the New Forest, really, and what we're going to do is look at each of the habitats, each of the special environments that we've got in the forest, and look at some of the wildlife that occurs in the winter months in the New Forest. First of all, just a very quick bit about us. As Leslie said, we're Wild New Forest. We do research and survey work across the New Forest, looking at some of our rare and scarce wildlife. And guided tours and boat trips. We're a not-for-profit company, so the money that we generate from the tours and the boat trips we put back into the research. We also do a lot with youngsters, so we do a lot of work with young people. We have a Young Explorers or a Wildlife Explorers Club, and we do a couple of annual camps as well, taking youngsters out, trying to engage them with wildlife, and especially young people that are passionate about wildlife but don't have the opportunity to get out in wildlife quite so much, and so we try to get them out in the field, which is becoming a bigger part of what we do. First slide, looking at the New Forest. I'm assuming as we're in Salisbury, we all know where the New Forest is. So the New Forest sort of bordered by Salisbury to the north, Southampton to the east, and Bournemouth to the west, and then the Solent to the south. So it's quite a small little footprint, but really important area for wildlife. And so today's talk, I'm going to look at the main habitats that we've got in the New Forest and what winter wildlife is there and what they're doing to survive the winter. So we're going to start with heathland, because I think the New Forest is best known for its heathland, despite the word forest in the title. We tend to think of forest as woodland, but in fact, forest is a French word that describes a hunting ground. So the New Forest has been the New Forest since 1079, so nearly 1,000 years. It's been there largely unchanged. It's made it a really rich area for wildlife. So some of our classic species, the Dartford warbler. So as a bird watcher, that's probably quite high on the list of classic New Forest species. The Dartford warbler is a resident, so it's sedentary, doesn't really go anywhere. It breeds in the New Forest and spends the winter in the forest. And it has a tough time because Dartford warblers are insectivorous, and so during these cold winter months, insects are less active. So Dartford warblers specialise. They spend their life in heather and gorse out on the heath. And they're particularly into arachnids, so spiders and mites and things. And there's a particular species, the gorse mite, that lives in gorse bushes, and tiny little mites, the size of a pinhead. And Dartford warblers spend their life grovelling around in the bushes, eating these gorse mites. And the gorse is quite important in the New Forest, because the gorse is quite a dense shrub. And it creates almost like a little microclimate. So even on the coldest days, it's a little bit warmer within the gorse, allowing some of these invertebrates to survive, and in turn allowing Dartford warblers and stonechats and other birds to make a living during these tough winter months. Another bird we might see is the redwing. Redwings come every year into the forest. They come to spend the winter with us. So redwings are a beautiful flocking thrush species. They have an amazing lifestyle. They spend their life, they breed in Scandinavia, into West Russia, and points north. And in these areas it gets so very cold in the winter months. They escape the frozen conditions over there and come to our relatively milder conditions here in the UK. So every year we get a big influx of redwings. So you can see them all around the forest. This year there's not so many because we've had quite a poor berry crop. So whereas the Dartford warbler likes to eat insects, the redwings like to eat berries, the flesh of the berries, so holly berries and rowan and that sort of thing. There's been quite a poor crop this winter, and so numbers are a little bit lower. And what that means for the redwings is they've got to go further to find food. So these redwings are flown across the North Sea, get into the UK, find we haven't got much of a berry crop, so they carry on. So they're nomadic, so they're heading south now, down onto the mainland, main part of the continent. We've had redwings we've ringed at Boulderwood turning up in Spain, so they've got quite a long journey. It's tough life being a redwing, but beautiful little birds and very unobtrusive, but we get huge numbers. So a couple of years ago we monitored a red-winged roost up in the north of the forest and had over 25,000 of them in one little block of trees roosting. So it's amazing how many are here for the winter months. But over in Scandinavia they're a common garden bird, nesting in gardens, but yeah, they're only spending winter with us. And so birds in the forest attract birds of prey. And so a couple of our classic birds of prey. The forest is fantastic for birds of prey, but here we've got two of our classics, the merlin and the hen harrier. So neither of these spend the summer in the forest, they just both come here for the winter from places further north, doing the same as the redwings. The merlin in particular likes to eat redwings. They've got a very specialist method. They're our smallest bird of prey, so they're sort of similar sort of size to a pigeon. And what they do, they just exhaust their prey. So they chase it and chase it and chase it until the prey that they're chasing is just absolutely exhausted and can't fly anymore and lands, and then they nobble it. Hen harrier is different. So often you'll see hen harriers floating over the heath, looking for prey to attack. So that's birds and small mammals. But, you know, I'm saying all this and I'm pointing out these birds, but in reality, you know, there's a lot of birds, but the New Forest is a big place, so it can be quite barren out on the heath in the winter months. So it can be quite hard to find these birds at times, particularly the birds of prey. Excuse the typo there. But jack snipe. So we've got a lot of nocturnal birds in the forest at this time of year. We've got jack snipe, snipe and woodcock. And funny enough, just last night we were out till God knows what time, midnight, going around the heath, doing some work with these birds. So a lot of these birds are hidden away during the day and they come out at night. And the New Forest is particularly important for these. The jack snipe, they're not a UK bird. They come from generally, well, we to be honest, we don't really understand where they come from, which is why we're doing the work with them at the moment. But we think our jack snipe are coming from central Russia to spend the winter with us. And they're very elusive, very hard to find. You can only really find them at night when they come out, and their specialism is to eat dung beetle larvae in cow pats and horse poo. And so this is a unique situation we have in the New Forest. It's the same with the woodcock. This is the woodcock. So very similar looking bird, but whereas the jack snipe is a little bit smaller than a starling. So I had one in my hand last night, and it was literally filled the palm of my hand. Whereas the woodcock, we also had one of those last night. They're more the size of a chicken, a big chicken. So they're out in the forest at night, and we've got this unique circumstance in the forest where our ponies, so we've got our ponies and the livestock that we know about, we'll talk a bit more about that later, but they're out in the forest, and there's quite strict rules and regulations about the New Forest ponies, in that they're not allowed medication while they're out in the forest. If a pony gets ill, it has to come off of the forest to have its medication, and it's not allowed back on for 28 days after it's cleared, the medication's cleared its system. And so their system's quite clean, and so their poo is quite clean. Then in turn, it's quite a good place for dung beetles, and that's what these guys like to eat. So we've got quite a unique situation here, eating dung beetle larvae. So if you go for a walk out in the forest and you see a cow pat and it's got lots of holes in it, it's either the dung beetle that's created those holes, or more likely it's the woodcock probing, looking for the larvae. And then this is us. So this is what we were doing last night. This wasn't from last night, but we go out at night and we use a thermal imaging camera. And so we try to find them. So some places there can be quite large numbers of these birds, even though you never see them during the day. And basically we sneak up on them, and we've got a fishing landing net, thermal imager, and we literally just go and plonk the net over them and catch them. But unfortunately for us, it's easier in the worse the weather, the easier it is. So it's the stormy, wet, windy, horrible nights that we're out doing that. Which is great fun. Right. And this is one of the other. So this is a ringed plover. This is another bird we caught in the forest, just to show you really what we're doing. So we're catching birds. We're putting a little unique ring on and then letting it go again. But we don't just put the ring on. We take a lot of measurements. So we measure the wing, we measure its size, its beak length, how much muscle it's got, how much fat it's got, and all of that information tells us a lot about the individual. One, if it's a local, because local birds are smaller, non-migratory birds don't carry as much muscle, and so it tells us a lot about the individuals. And then hopefully down the line somebody else will catch it again, and it will tell us a bit more information about where these birds go, because we simply don't know. So it's quite interesting. And so reptiles. So this isn't something you'd think you'd talk about with a winter talk, but reptiles are here. They're sedentary. They don't go anywhere. They hibernate during the winter. And I mentioned before about the Dartford warbler and its association with gorse bushes. The reason it had that relationship with gorse bushes is because of the little microclimate that gorse bushes create. And that's where a lot of these guys go. So adders and lizards, they'll hibernate, and they'll find, quite often they'll go underneath gorse bushes. They'll dig down in the soil a little bit, not particularly deep, and create these hibernacula, or sometimes in log piles as well. We think of these guys as being as hibernating. They do hibernate, but they're controlled by the temperature. So on mild days, like we've been having recently, less likely to see snakes out, but it's quite often you'll see lizards out even during the winter months on a mild sunny day. Just one to keep an eye out for. And of course, it's not just. We put this in just to make a point. It's not just about the animals, the flora as well. We've got an interesting mix of tree flora here. So this is downy birch. So this picture I took last week because I was mindful that we're coming here. And this just shows a downy birch. So a birch tree, we've got two types of birch tree in the forest, silver birch and downy birch. Silver birch is the most abundant, which is a pioneer tree that spends its life on the edge of woodlands generally. But downy birch is different. Downy birch is generally a tree of open areas. And in this picture, it doesn't look like much, but we've got both side by side. So you can see this is a silver birch, and next to it, a downy birch. So the trunk looks very similar, but the downy birch has quite droopy stature, I suppose you'd say. So it's worth keeping an eye out for downy birch. It's not a particularly common tree, but we get quite a lot of them across the forest. And just a little fact about birch trees. Silver birches, they're both got silver bark. And the reason for that is, everything in nature and everything in the wild has to be thermoregulated if it's alive, if it's living a life. And these trees, silver birch and downy birch, are designed to be out in the open. Silver birch is a woodland edge tree, downy birch is supposed to be out in the open, so they have to have silver bark because they have to control their temperature, and so they reflect the sun. Whereas other trees that are more designed to be in woodland have darker bark to hold the heat. So this is the silver on the tree is literally so it can help thermoregulate. It suffers a lot in the summer and hot weather. And there's also flora out and about in the winter on the heathland. This is coral necklace. This is one of our really special plants, and it's quite a rare plant, but I like to point it out because you tend to think of wild stuff, particularly rare wild stuff, as being out in the wilds in hard to access places in the middle of a bog or something. Coral necklace thrives on well-trodden paths, and so coral necklace you'll generally find in puddles, in paths, because they like to be in an environment that's slightly wet in the winter, dry in the summer, and gets trodden on a lot. So it's quite unique. So they have a relationship with where you get a lot of cattle, but also where you get people walking up and down paths. And so this is one of the really rare flowers that you need to go out into the busy places to find. So it's worth keeping an eye out for in puddles. Coral necklace, it's a lovely plant. Quite small and fragile. It's amazing. A lot of these plants that thrive from disturbance often appear quite fragile, but they're incredibly tough in reality. And then we can't talk about the forest without talking about fungus. So fungus is a really important part of New Forest life. So we've got 2,700 species of fungi across the forest. So this is just a few examples that you might get on the heath. Yellow brain is a very common one. Badly named, to my eyes, that's orange, but you find that a lot in wildlife. It's just, but it's called yellow brain. Some people call it witch's butter, but witch's butter is actually a black one. But it gets the name because these used to be collected, and if you're worried, if you're concerned, you might have a witch paying you a visit, you could burn this by your front door and it would scare them away, apparently. It burns a funny colour, so that's why. Often get it on gorse. And then this is one of my favourites, parrot wax cap. So the New Forest is fantastic for its wax cap species out in the heathland. So these are mycorrhizal. So these have a symbiotic relationship with grasses. So we hear a lot about fungi in woodland having symbiotic relationship with trees. Wax caps have that same relationship with grasses, and it's a really good indicator. So fungi is really important as an ecologist because they tell you so much more about the environment than you can find from looking around. So just the fact that you've got parrot wax caps thriving means it's a really healthy, really rich environment. So it saves us a lot of work. We can just confirm we've got parrot wax caps here, then it's good. It's in good condition. And we've got about 15 species of wax cap occurring in the New Forest regularly. And so it's, very, very good place. Then this is the classic, quite a common one, but the parasol. So these are these big old fungi that are sort of the size of dinner plates that you get across the heathland areas. Very popular with people when they go foraging. But quite striking, quite impressive. Quite an important fungi as well for wildlife. So this is an important food source for a whole load of mammals, but also insects as well. So a lot of insects, invertebrates, flies in particular, will lay their eggs on the fungi, and then the larvae consumes the flesh of the fungi. So it's really important. And then finally, scarlet elf cup, which is just a classic winter New Forest species. In fact, there is one more. So we can't talk about heathland without talking about devil's fingers. So this is another classic one. I always find this a little bit annoying, though, I have to say, because devil's fingers are really striking species. But we've got 2,700 species in the New Forest of fungi. About 99% of them are native species that are naturally here. And then this one, the one that everybody wants to see, is actually non-native. So this is actually an Australian species of fungi. We get across the forest, and we think it's from the First World War, when we had a lot of wood shipments come in from Australia. And they think that the spores came in with those wood shipments. And the reason that the epicenter of devil's fingers is its settling, which is where a lot of the wood was kept. But now you get devil's fingers all across the forest, and it's quite a draw. As you can see, quite a striking and very, very weird fungi. It grows out of an egg, and it attracts flies. Its other name is octopus stinkhorn, and it does an half stink as well. So you don't want to get too close to take these pictures. Right, so that takes us on into woodland. So woodland environment in the winter time. This is where I feel most at home, in the woods. We'll start with birds again, some of our classic birds, the hawfinch. I can't do a talk without talking about hawfinch, because I've been studying hawfinch for about 15 years in the New Forest. I talked about hawfinch when I came here before, so I won't bore you with it all again, but the New Forest is a really important place for hawfinch. We've got about a third of the UK population in the New Forest, and they're tied to our beech and our holly woodlands. So that's sort of like one of the classic New Forest species. But also, the goshawk is another one. We've been doing a recent study on goshawk over the past few years. We found 45 pairs of goshawk. And interestingly, goshawk is a predator that would potentially eat a hawfinch, but goshawks have been benefiting a lot of our smaller birds. And because goshawks, their favourite food is squirrels, jays, crows, and wood pigeons. And jays and crows and squirrels are like the number one enemy of the hawfinch. And so, bizarrely, the goshawks are moving in and scaring a lot of the jays and the crows away. So we're getting back to a natural level of jays and crows, and so that's benefiting birds like hawfinch. So although a goshawk will quite happily eat a hawfinch, they're actually also benefiting at the same time. And that's how nature is so complicated and so complex. There's all these little interlinked relationships. So here's a little video of a goshawk, just to show. This is an adult male goshawk caught on one of our Pine Martin trail cameras, just mooching about. But yeah, beautiful birds. A bit like a sparrowhawk, but a little bit bigger than a buzzard. I always think of it as like a sparrowhawk on steroids, because they're big, chunky, beefy, butch things. They're definitely the top dog in the forest. They're like the apex predator. Okay, and then, so we've got 5 species of deer in the forest, but we're going to talk about 3 of our regular ones here: roe, muntjac, and fallow. And so the roe, this is a roe with a couple of fawns, obviously not in the winter months, but the roe are present all year round. And an important part, they're a native species, the roe deer, that generally you don't see in large numbers, but they're spread quite thinly all across the forest. Generally you come across them in 1s and 2s. And then muntjac is sort of like the new kid on the block. You don't see these very often because they're quite timid, quite shy. In the New Forest, that is. They've got good reason to be, because unfortunately they're shot on sight, the muntjacs, because they're as attractive as they are. The video's stuttering a bit there. They are quite damaging to our woodlands, muntjac. They've only been around for about 25 years. They're quite small. It's hard to determine there, but they're quite small, about the size of an Alsatian dog, and quite problematic. I've been told that they taste very nicely. I've not tried one myself. And then this is the extra one, the fallow deer. So this is our most abundant species that we've got in the forest. Fallow they're non-native again, they're from southern Europe, and they were introduced by the Normans about 1,000 years ago. So although they're non-native, they've been here for a very long time. Quite distinctive with their black and white stripes on their tail. And forming large groups. We've got somewhere between 5,000 and 8,000 fallow in the forest, so they are managed as well. And then we can't talk about all of that and winter out in the woodlands without talking about the New Forest pig. So obviously the New Forest pig isn't wild, but we have pannage in the New Forest. So in the New Forest from September through to November, pigs are let out to forage for acorns. This is an ancient tradition that goes back alongside commoning, that goes back. Pigs were turned out, and still are turned out, to eat acorns. So acorns, when they're green, are actually poisonous to the ponies and to the cattle. So they send out the pigs to go and forage and munch as many as possible. Some species of pig, the acorns are actually also poisonous to the pigs. But Panish pork is one of the main reasons they're turned out. So generally they have this lovely little burst of freedom and then tend not to last too long afterwards. And so it's a little bit bittersweet seeing pigs out in the forest. The reason pigs aren't out all the time is because pigs and ponies don't get on at all. Ponies hate pigs. And if a pony has an altercation with a pig, I've seen it twice now. I've seen one pig get killed and one pig get seriously injured by a pony. And we think that goes back to the days of wild boar. So wild boar used to occur in the New Forest, it no longer does. But wild boar is fully capable of killing a pony foal. And so we think there's this sort of historic reaction within ponies in the forest that are anti-pigs. And so that's why pigs aren't out all year round, because it would cause chaos. But there's not so many out this year, or they're all in now anyway, but there weren't that many out this year because it was a poor acorn crop, so it's not necessary to turn so many out. But they are quite endearing, the New Forest pigs. So back to wildlife, southern wood ant. And so this is another amazing species that you see in the woodlands that create these lovely big, almost like volcano-shaped nests. The nests go dormant and quiet during the winter months, but the ants are still in there doing their thing. And it's amazing, when we go out with the thermal imaging camera, you can often see these wood ant nests are really warm compared to the rest of the environment. So they stay warm all year round. And they're amazing species. And if you're out in the forest on a sunny day in the winter, in the woods, have a look. If you find a wood ant's nest that's in a little sunny hollow, they'll be active repairing their nest, because the nests get damaged by, just by weather, by ponies, by deer, by badgers. Badgers like to forage into wood ant nests. And so they get damaged, so the ants come out and repair, and it's, fascinating to watch. Minotaur beetle. So this is one of my favourites, and you can see these in the winter months. So this is a dung beetle that creates, like you see, if you watch like a David Attenborough film, you've got two types of dung beetle. You've got the ones that lay their eggs in the poo, but then you've got the impressive ones that roll up a little ball of dung and take it away. And these are dung rollers, these ones. Not quite as impressive as the ones you see on David Attenborough films, because they make a little pile of dung the size of a pea, and they drag it away. They dig a hole, put the piece of dung in the hole, and then lay an egg on top. But it can be really entertaining to watch, because from the dung to the hole, they'll go in a dead straight line. And so if there's any obstacles in the way, they'll go over it rather than around it. They're like really, really stubborn, and it can be very entertaining to watch. But this next clip, I'm hoping this works. So this is dung beetles in action. So this was one we found recently. So often, if you go looking in cow pats, it's not something I necessarily recommend, but you can see dung beetles having an absolute field day. So these are door beetles rather than minotaurs, but they're doing the same thing. As happy as a pig in poo. But these are a really important part of the ecosystem in the New Forest. They provide a lot of food for a lot of things, and they break down the poo. There's a lot of poo in the forest from the stock. They break it down and recycle it back into nutrients, and so they're doing a really important job. It's not often you find a pat as popular as that one. I don't know what that cow must have been eating, but something. There you go. And then a few of our other quirky things. Dogs vomit slime mould. Who would have thought? But slime mould is another important thing. We talked about fungi. So with fungi, we'll talk a bit more about fungi in a bit. Fungi breaks down dead and dying organic material and returns it to the soil. Does an important job. Slime mould is similar. Does a similar thing. But whereas fungi are the big, decomposers, slime moulds are like the vacuum cleaners. So if slime moulds are mobile, believe it or not, they move very, very slowly, but they suck up all the detritus. So if it wasn't for slime mould, we'd be up to our eyes in little bits of detritus. So it's the slime mould that's consuming that and producing these fruiting bodies. They've got some interesting names, such as this. One of the reasons why is because they're quite poorly understood until very recent years. And so the naming has been done only in the last 20 or 30 years. And so whoever decided to call this one Dog's Vomit Slime Mould. You can kind of see why, but it's, an important species, but very poorly understood. And then onto the fungi. So fungi plays a really important role in our ecosystem, as I said before, and in the woodland environment is key. So some of the lovely species. Porcelain, which is one of our favourites, which is like a translucent. So if you look underneath it up to the sky, it's kind of see-through. It's a lovely, really delicate thing, but it doesn't last very long. It only lasts for a day or two, and then it's gone. Fly agaric, the good old famous toadstool. We get lots of those across the New Forest. And pine martin. I talked about pine martins here before, so we tried to put a couple of different clips. But winter in the woodlands is you get a lot of pine martins out and about. So this is a pine martin, a rare daytime clip, but they're active across the forest all through the winter. They can't hibernate because they have to, because they live their life up in the trees. They're arboreal. They can't put on too much fat or too much muscle because it makes them too heavy. They'll fall out the trees. And so they have to eat little and often all year round. So they can't build up the muscle mass that they need to be able to hibernate. And so they're active all the time. This is another pine martin clip. Well, forgive me for putting pine martins in. I just love them. They're very endearing. It's one of these things, though. As a human, you look at it and it's very endearing. But actually, if you're anything smaller than a pine martin, they're horrendous. They're vicious, very vicious things. We've got some footage of one killing a grey squirrel, and it just doesn't. frenzied. Okay, so that's woodland. So now we'll move into urban areas. So this is what we don't think about in the forest. We've got the heathland, we've got the woodland, we've got the mires, we've got the coast. But actually, our urban environment is also a habitat. And so we've got some really lovely urban environments in the forest. And in the winter, there's a good bit of wildlife. This is one I photographed last week. Winter heliotrope. So winter heliotrope is a lovely winter flowering species. Got a really sweet smell. And this I saw last week in Lymington, on the edge of Lymington. We were walking along the lane, and you could just smell it before we saw it. This lovely sweet smell. But this is a really important species for some of our winter nectaring insects. Funny enough, it's not native. So it was fashionable in the 1800s to have it in your garden. So it was imported from the Mediterranean region and then escaped and it's become naturalised. Foxes, we all know, share their world with us, and it all depends what side you sit on, whether you see that as a good thing or a bad thing. I kind of sit on the fence a little bit. I can see both sides. But either way, foxes are native, natural species, and they're a lovely species, very intelligent species. And so I always get a joy from seeing a fox, whether it's out in the wilds or in the town. Always pleased to see one. And then probably my most favourite species of all. And see, this is something that always stumps people, because people know me that I've studied waders and hawfinches and stuff most of my life. But actually sparrows are my far and away most favourite species. And so it needs to be celebrated. Sparrows are absolutely lovely. We take them for granted in the urban environment. But for me, there's a load of reasons why they're important to me. But mainly, they're just full of character. They're all individuals, they're full of character, they're cheeky. And I've had times in my life where I've for whatever reason, I've been stuck at home, and it's the sparrows that have kept me through, just watching them in my garden. And they're so characterful. And they're living a life just the same as any other wildlife out in the wilds. They're surviving from day to day. They've got to use their wits, they've got to survive. They're constantly battling their pecking order within their flock and for territory. And they're doing it, and they're doing it well. So sparrows are coming back a bit, but I just want to sort of give a nod to sparrows. One of the reasons, I just digress a tiny bit, is I had a pet sparrow for quite a long time, because it's one that got taken, fell out of the nest, broke its beak, went to the vets, and the vet said the beak will grow back, but it didn't. And so our kids hand-reared it. So we went back to the vets and said it hasn't, and he said, well, you've got two choices: you keep it as a pet, or we euthanize it. So we had to keep it. So that was Scooby the sparrow, and he was free flying in our house. He had two spots where he went to the loo, and he used to just steal food off of our plate. He went nuts for rice all the time, and he got out quite a lot, but he knew he was better off at home, so he always came back. Real character. Until sadly we had him for 7 years, and he got nobbled by a cat, unfortunately. But I've got such an affection for sparrows. So there you go. But some of our other urban species that we might see, siskin, lovely bird to get in the garden in the winter months. Proper wild bird, but they come to feed us in the winter when they're struggling for food. And goldfinch as well. So goldfinch is another beautiful bird that we get in the gardens, and they're proper. We see them in gardens and think, oh, it's a garden bird. But I don't know, garden bird, they're still a wild bird. And I'm a bird ringer, so I ring birds in my garden. And we've had goldfinches in our garden that have subsequently been seen in Ireland, in France, in Scotland. And so they're moving around a lot, these birds. And so they're having impressive lives. And then a couple of the other urban things. So we put New Forest cow in, just because they are quite urban. And I've got just a couple of interesting tales. I remember once, it was actually in the middle of the summer, but I was in Brockenhurst at the bakers, lovely bakers in Brockenhurst, lovely bacon rolls there, and it's full of tourists, and there's a load of commotion outside. So we went out to have a look, and a cow was running down the high street. I thought, only in the New Forest could that happen. And then the other one, we were in traffic in Burley, driving home in the middle of the town in Burley. Car in front of us was a Land Rover towing a trailer which had hay on it. And we got stuck in traffic, and then all these cows just descended on this trailer. And then the traffic cleared, and then he moved on, and he had this like Peter Pan with all these cows running after. It's very entertaining. So yeah, a New Forest cow. And then my favourite, the donkeys. So the donkeys are lovely, but this is a little bit of a nod towards winter months and on the road. So donkeys, cows and ponies, they all radiate towards the roads in the winter for a whole myriad of reasons. One, because the roads stay warmer because of the tarmac, but also the gritting and the salt in the grit, they come to lick that. But there's also a chemical in screen wash that the ponies like, so they'll go and lick that off the roads, typically at night. So it's just a sort of a nod that we have to be careful. And the donkeys, I just love the donkeys. They always look so grumpy. Maybe it's I can relate to them, I don't know. Okay, so then mires and wetland. So our mires, I'll just go back a bit. This is a classic New Forest mire. So this is a wetland, believe it or not. And so this is a peat bog, really deep peat bog with sphagnum moss on top. And this grass grows on the moss. So it looks like from here you could just walk across that valley. But you can't. If you tried, you'd be up to your waist in wetness. But that's a really important habitat. And that is probably our most important habitat in the New Forest for wildlife. And so the New Forest is designated as a Ramsar site because of our wetlands. And so it's important for a whole load of things, including lapwing, snipe. I mentioned jack snipe and woodcock before, but it's snipe as well, and these wetlands are important. And so not only are these wetlands important for the wildlife and for the cows and the ponies and everything else as well, but they're a sink, they absorb all the water. So all this rain that we've had recently, these mires act as great big sponges and hold the water. Then in times of drought, they stay wet all year round, which is why they're so important for wildlife. And then some of our other species. So this is how we see them in the summer months. This beautiful demoiselle and golden ring dragonfly, but their larvae are in those mires all year round. And so this is a larvae that's come out, and the golden ring dragonfly has emerged from that casing. But they're there, even though we only see them in the summer months. They're there in the water all year round, and that's a really important environment for them. And one, I'll try not to sort of go on about it too much, but one that we really need to protect above anything else from all sorts of threats. So there's a lot of work going on with our New Forest wetlands areas. Some of the wetland fungi. Bog beacon is a lovely winter/spring species. Adds a bit of colour to the bogs. So this species specialises in breaking down dead leaves or leaf mulch in the wetlands, where it congregates in the wetlands. You'll get bog beacon and it breaks it down, and these are the fruiting bodies that pop up like little boxing gloves. And then my favourite, the bog bean. And so this is how it flowers in the summer, but of course that plant is still there in the winter. Again, really integral with all the rest of the insect larvae and everything else. All these things are interconnected. And sundew, which is our main carnivorous species that catches flies on these little sticky bobs and curls up on the flies to consume them. And the New Forest pony. So the New Forest pony, I can't talk about this, I just felt guilty because we put in cow, donkey and everything else. I feel I ought to give a nod towards the pony. And the ponies, of course, are owned by the commoners, as are the cows and the donkeys and everything else. But they without them, the New Forest wouldn't be the New Forest. And so they are like the architects of the forest. They make the forest what it is. A really important part of the landscape. Everything from their grazing to their dung, and all of the species that they introduce and work with, and particularly our flora. So if it wasn't for the ponies keeping the grass short, a lot of the rare orchids and other flora, we just wouldn't have them, because a lot of these plant species, they can't compete with the grass. They get shadowed out by grass, and so there's all these tiny little rare flowers thanks to these guys. And so, yeah, you'll hear sometimes some people will give the ponies a little bit of bad press, but they're in fact a really important part of the forest. Just a little video clip of one munching some holly, just because. How they do it, I don't know. They all sorts. One little fact about ponies: you'll get them eating gorse. They'll eat anything and everything. But the gorse-eating ponies, you can tell they're gorse eaters because they grow a moustache. So if you see a pony with a moustache, it's because it likes to eat gorse, and they grow the moustache to protect their top lip from being spiked when they're eating. So there you go. And then a quick one on the coastal areas. So the coast is quite different. And so when we think of the New Forest, we generally think of the New Forest, the heathlands, the woodlands, and all the stuff inland. But of course, we've got this coastal strip, which is vitally important for a lot of wildlife. So just a quick run through these. Brent geese come and spend the winter with us. They come all the way from Siberia just to spend the winter with us. They have a treacherous journey to get here. Really endearing species that are eating eelgrass and stuff and seaweed. They come here because it's a safe environment for them to be, which is amazing if you think. Busy central southern England, we've got this wild environment with birds, proper wild birds like Brent geese can come and spend the time with us. Avocet, there's a load of avocet out in the marshes at the moment. Beautiful birds. And spoonbill, another one of my favourites. I am acutely aware that quite often I say it's one of my favourites on every slide, but I just find it difficult to choose. But spoonbill genuinely are one of my favourites. And we've had a record. So spoonbill first started visiting the marshes in about 2002. I remember the day because I had a phone call. I was actually working with somebody up in London, and I had a phone call, and I literally left work and came back to see the spoonbill on the marshes in March 2002. But now, yesterday, there were 40 of them there. So it's amazing how times have changed. But yeah, spoonbills are now present all through the winter months on the marshes. Lovely birds. And then another one I would never have thought, little young me would never have believed I'd be seeing white-tailed eagles. But we've got white-tailed eagles as well hanging around the Solent, part of the Isle of Wight release. But now they've become a regular sight, and it's always a joy to see an eagle out and about. And then the seals. That's another thing. 20 years ago, seals were quite rare, but it's a good indicator of how this management with the water has improved, particularly on the rivers, Beaulieu River in particular. Seals are ever present. And then this year, this little clip on this little picture here, this was a real red letter day. I remember the date. It was the 6th of January this year. And we had a seal pup born, a grey seal pup. The first time there's been one in our region born. And it was born on the Beaulieu River on the 6th of January. And so it was very, very exciting. And then the next day we were out and we saw 2 pairs of grey seal copulating. So we're hoping that in a few weeks' time we might have more little grey seal pups. And so, yeah, the seals are doing well. So we've got 2 types. These 2, the left in the middle are grey seals. This one on the right is a common seal. They also breed on the river now as well. So it's quite remarkable. I'd never have believed that as a youngster. We'd have seals breeding in our area. And then this little clip, because we go up and down the river quite a lot on boat trips, and we see some funny things. Quite often now, this last year, we've seen, I think about 3 occasions, we've seen roe deer swimming across the river. But the weirdest one was shortly after this, we had a grey squirrel swim across the river, across the widest part of the river. Probably about, I don't know, it must have been about a third of a mile wide, and a grey squirrel swam across. How very bizarre. And then just a little bit of a nod to our coastal areas, to lichen. So I'm no specialist in lichen, but lichen is a big feature of the New Forest. It's one of the best places in the UK, and one of the best places actually in Europe for lichen. Largely thanks to our airflow that we have coming off the Atlantic. We have this clean, kind of moist airflow coming in. It makes it perfect for lichen. And so we've got some really quite rare species all across the forest, but the coastal strip in particular is really good for its diversity of lichen species. Goldeneye lichen is quite a striking one. And then just a little bit about bird ringing. So in the winter months at the coast, we do quite a lot of bird ringing, and so this is going out. I mentioned it briefly before with the nighttime nocturnal stuff, but we're out by day as well doing it, working with the likes of RSPB and the BTO, doing quite long-term studies. But it's just a little nod because I stand here and talk about it. But it's not just me. There's a whole team of us. So Emily helping coordinate it all, and a team of ringers. We try to get as many youngsters involved as possible, and as many what's the word? Females, ladies, because I'm just conscious that wildlife has been very much a dominant area for grey-haired, grey-bearded old men. And so we're trying to change that one step at a time, getting young people and women involved. And they both are generally much better at it, to be fair. And then just a little nod, we've got, if you're interested in wildlife in the forest, we've got a newsletter once a month that just has a little bit of an update of what's going on with wildlife in the New Forest. And so you can get that off of our website. You can sign up for it, and it's just got, so we're just sort of keen about promoting what's going on with wildlife in the New Forest, because that's what we're all about. So historically, wildlife has had this thing where it's sort of a bit of an us and them, and it's all kept secret and kept quiet, but we want it to be open. We want to share the beauties of wildlife and make it accessible in the New Forest, because it's really important. It's for everybody to enjoy, and it's important for all of us, for whether it's mental health or for just getting out in the air is really important. So we want to make it accessible for all. But when you're out and about, New Forest Code, we always endorse. Most of it's common sense, but just to look after our wildlife. And then finally, questions. I have to say any questions when you're just going.